With the success of Apollo 10, NASA is ready to land the next mission on the Moon. Apollo 7, 8, 9 and 10 had all done a great job. Each flight achieved all its important objectives, giving Apollo 11 all the information that was needed to try a descent to the lunar surface. This is the beginning of 1969, and at that time we were all training to go to the Apollo 11 site, the Sea of Tranquility. We had 3 crews training. Apollo 11 was going to make the try in July, and then 2 months later Pete Conrad's crew, Apollo 12, would make it if they didn't make it. 2 months after that, November, Al Shepard and Apollo 13. So you had 3 chances to get to the Moon by the end of the decade. And when Neil and Buzz and Mike were selected to fly on Apollo 11, everyone knew they were going to make the first shot. They were a really good crew. They got along really well. They were just great. Neil Armstrong is what I would say the quiet type. He was obviously in charge. You could look at him and you knew he was the commander. Buzz Aldrin was absolutely a whiz in the operation of the computers. I think he knew what was going on inside the machine. He understood the beauty and the complexity of these spacecraft. Mike Collins, the guy you wanted to have in your hip pocket in case anything went wrong. Extremely competent in his judgment. And the training for Apollo 11 is very, very intensive. They were all going through geology training, and Buzz Aldrin said it was, quite frankly, an eye-opener to him, but it was a little bit make-believe for them to be geologists for that brief period of time. So they were ready to go by mid-1969. Their scheduled flight date was July 16th, 1969. And on that date, 8 years, 1 month and 22 days after John Kennedy challenged America to land a man on the Moon, Armstrong, Aldrin and Collins are ready to fly. Their ascent was perfect on their way at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Neil Armstrong remarked that Saturn gave us a magnificent ride. And then the Capcom Charlie Duke gave the crew a go for TLI, and off they went into lunar orbit successfully and perfectly. And then as you get into lunar orbit, they're starting to make preparations to get ready to go. And Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin float down into the lunar module Eagle from their command module Columbia, leaving Mike Collins behind. And they started their descent. They separated from the lunar module, and immediately they had problems. Communications problems you would not believe. Telemetry drops out, communications drop out, and this was because they were kept on dropping below the lunar horizon, and Mission Control couldn't see them. Mike Collins in the command module could. So what we would do is we would say, Mike, have the crew select a different antenna. Take it aft Omni or Omni Bravo. We'd roll the spacecraft a little bit and we get data. Or Mike Collins could use his big dish, the huge communications arrays on the command module, to establish communications with Eagle during the descent. And the descent itself was very tricky business. Our plan was to start from about 47,000 feet altitude, 3,000 miles per hour, to use one continuous rocket burn to decelerate to a hover in the landing area. And during this time, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are trying their damnedest to get the thing down despite huge computer problems that they had. They started the engine burn for their final descent, and almost immediately they got an alarm which said computer problem 1202. Well, what's 1202? So the guidance guy, John Aaron, had to come up with an idea and said, we're going that flight. So there's a little bit of confusion as to what it actually was, and what had happened was that the lunar module's computer was getting too overloaded, because what Buzz Aldrin had done, being Dr. Rendezvous, he had left both the rendezvous radar and the landing radar on at the same time, and these are feeding information to the computer both at once, and this is overloading the thing, because he wanted to, of course, have the radar to land, but also if they needed to abort, they wanted to reacquire a mic as soon as possible so that they could get back into a docking situation. So they ignore the computer alarm. They get another 1201 alarm explaining that the computer is beginning to shut down non-critical systems with the lunar module to free up memory space, which in the end were situations that were not that critical. And now the crew are beginning to enter the final stages of their descent, and Neil Armstrong is getting ready to take over manual control when the LEM starts sending more strange signals that they've overshot their landing zone. Now, Neil Armstrong had to take control earlier than he should have, and Armstrong is one of the best LEM pilots in all of NASA. He had an experience with the LLTV, the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle, which was an ungainly looking contraption that was meant to imitate the LEM, the lunar module. It was basically a jet engine turned on its end. And during training, Neil had to bail out of this thing because it just lost control and the thing crashed. And he had the coolness and the lucidity to pull on the abort handle even though everything was going wrong around him. So Neil Armstrong really was an incredible pilot. So he took control of Eagle and started to guide her down annually without the assistance of the computer. And when they flipped the lunar module to its heads up position, which they would use to land, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin saw a sight that they did not want to see. The computer had steered them into a region of football stadium-sized craters, surrounded by steep slopes and covered with very large boulders. Now, for Neil Armstrong, there are 4 things you can do. You can land short, land long, land left or land right. To land short, you gotta pitch up like this and you lose sight of where you're going. Left and right is an equally difficult maneuver. The easiest thing to do is just to pitch forward a little bit and fly over it and land long. And this is what Neil Armstrong decided to do. So in mission control, they start seeing this odd telemetry from the lunar module that they'd stopped the descent and were flying horizontally across the moon at a high rate of speed. And that's one of the worst things you can do for gas, is stop your descent, because then you got to take time flying level, and then you got to take time to get the rate of descent built up again. All that takes gas, okay? And they didn't have a lot of extra fuel, so when we saw the telemetry from the lunar module saying that Neil Armstrong had stopped the descent, everyone wondered, I wonder if he's going to make it. And now the crew is kicking up some dust because he's found a relatively level and smooth landing spot. Neil had the one thing that they did not have in mission control. He had the out the window view. He knew if they were descending over a safe place to land or over a boulder field. Our job in mission control was to tell him how much fuel he had. And so when the crew started kicking up some dust, we knew we were damn close to the lunar surface. And then Buzz Aldrin starts making the call, 50 feet, 40 feet. And we also look at the fuel gauge because we're getting pretty low on fuel, down to the last couple of percent in the fuel tanks. They're getting closer and closer and closer. and more dust. They were blowing lunar dust everywhere. It was like landing through the fog. And then at 6 feet above the lunar surface, 6-foot long probes touched the lunar surface, and they bent, sent an electric current to the lunar module, which activated the light. And Buzz Aldrin said, "Contact light." And Neil Armstrong shut down Eagle's computer, and they fell the 6-foot gap down onto the moon. And then everything came to a screeching halt, and there they were. And then there was not a great sense of, oh, we've done it. We've done part of it. But there was a smile of satisfaction that we had done this job. But they hadn't finished their job yet by any means or respect. They have successfully landed on the moon. Yes. They have to get outside, get back in and come home now. So just 2 hours after landing on the moon, Neil Armstrong opens up the hatch of their lunar module and begins to climb down the 9 steps of the lunar module ladder. While he's at the top of the ladder, he pulls a little rung and out deploys a video camera, which allows live broadcasting of what's going on. And we see Neil Armstrong in a grainy, upside down picture beginning to climb down these steps. As he's coming down, he goes down onto the foot of the lunar module Eagle, and then pushes himself back up to see if he can get back inside. And then he comes down for the final time, and he's looking around. He's looking down below him at the soil that he can see. He's not on the moon yet. He's still on the foot of the LEM, and he can see the lunar dust below him. And he says it's much like a powder down there. And then he says he's going to step off the LEM. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And with that, he steps off the foot of the LEM and puts his boot in the lunar soil for the first time in human history. 20 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin joins Neil Armstrong on the surface of the moon. Armstrong and Aldrin spend just 2 hours exploring the Sea of Tranquility. And they deploy a US flag and leave a set of reflective mirrors on the moon. And one of the interesting things is that they can send a man to the moon, but they can't think to put a flag 50 feet away from a rocket engine that's about to go off. So when Neil and Buzz climbed back inside Eagle, they're getting ready to blow the ascent stage and head on off. And as they do so, the flag gets blown to hell, basically. A problem which was corrected on the subsequent moon missions. Put the flag a little way away from the rocket motor. So they were returning home safely to Mike, and Mike Collins said that as he saw the lunar module coming up, he said, "Oh yeah, it's a beautiful little thing. It's down there among the craters, and it gets slowly bigger and bigger, and it was almost like riding rails. They were very precise." And then of course they come up right next to Mike, and it was his job, as before, to make the connection between the two vehicles. And then they start to head home. Apollo 11 was really just a test flight. Get them down, get them back home as simply as they possibly could. And that's about what they did, laying the groundwork for future missions to embark on more ambitious lunar exploration.